Welcome back to another incredible story. If you're new here, this channel brings you powerful emotional narratives every week. Stories about family, secrets, and the choices that change everything. Subscribe now so you never miss an upload. Trust me, today's story will leave you speechless. Let's begin. Elena Martinez had always prided herself on being practical, but when she locked eyes with Omar al-Rashid across the crowded networking event at the Kuwait City Hilton, something shifted inside her. He was everything the brochures promised about Gulf businessmen. Impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, dark eyes that crinkled when he smiled, and a confidence that came from generations of wealth. What the brochures didn't mention was the way he listened when she spoke about her consulting work, leaning in as if her words about supply chain optimization were the most fascinating thing he'd heard all evening. By the time he invited her to dinner at his favorite restaurant overlooking the Arabian Gulf, Elena had already broken her cardinal rule about mixing business with pleasure. The restaurant was perched on the 40th floor of a glass tower, and as Omar ordered in fluid Arabic, gesturing gracefully to emphasize his points to the waiter, Elena found herself wondering what it would be like to be part of this glittering world. The food arrived in waves, each dish more exquisite than the last, but Elena barely tasted any of it. She was too busy studying the way Omar's hands moved when he talked, the way his laugh seemed to fill the space between them with warmth. When he reached across the white tablecloth and took her hand, his skin warm against hers, she felt a flutter in her stomach that she hadn't experienced since college. This is dangerous, she thought, but she didn't pull away. Omar told her about his import-export business, his family's trading legacy that stretched back 5 generations, and his penthouse apartment with views that made this restaurant look pedestrian. He spoke with the easy charm of someone who had never been denied anything, yet there was something in his eyes when he looked at her that felt genuine, almost vulnerable. As the evening wound down and the city lights sparkled below them like scattered diamonds, Omar leaned close and whispered an invitation that made her pulse quicken. Would she like to see the penthouse? Not tonight, he added quickly, reading her hesitation, but perhaps tomorrow evening? He wanted to cook for her, he said, something his mother had taught him. It was such a specific, intimate detail that Elena found herself agreeing before her rational mind could intervene. As she rode the elevator down alone later that night, Omar having insisted on settling the bill despite her protests, Elena caught her reflection in the mirrored walls and barely recognized the flushed, bright-eyed woman staring back at her. The next evening, Elena stood before her hotel mirror for the 3rd time, adjusting the neckline of her emerald dress. She had packed it for a client dinner that had been cancelled, but now she was grateful for its elegant simplicity. Her phone buzzed with Omar's text. The driver was waiting downstairs. Elena grabbed her clutch and tried to ignore the nervous energy thrumming through her veins. The Mercedes that whisked her through Kuwait City's evening traffic was sleek and silent, the driver a professional who didn't attempt conversation. They drove through neighborhoods that grew progressively more upscale, past gated compounds and architectural marvels that seemed to defy physics. Finally, they pulled up to a tower that rose like a blade of glass and steel into the darkening sky. The lobby was all marble and gold accents, with a security desk staffed by 3 uniformed men who nodded respectfully as Elena approached. One of them made a quick phone call, then escorted her to a private elevator with only 2 buttons, lobby and penthouse. The ride up was so smooth, she barely felt the movement, just a slight pressure in her ears as the floors ticked by on the digital display. When the doors opened, they revealed not a hallway but a private foyer with a single ornate door. Before she could knock, it swung open to reveal Omar, dressed more casually than the night before, in dark slacks and a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. The cooking outfit, he said with a grin, and Elena felt some of her nervousness dissipate. He took her hand and led her inside, and Elena's breath caught. The penthouse was spectacular, all floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing a 360-degree view of the city and the Gulf beyond. The interior was a masterful blend of traditional Middle Eastern design and modern luxury. With intricate geometric patterns incorporated into contemporary furniture, rich fabrics in jewel tones, and artwork that looked museum quality. But what struck Elena most was how lived in it felt, how personal. There were books scattered on the coffee table, a pair of reading glasses abandoned on the arm of a chair, photographs in silver frames showing Omar with an older couple who must be his parents. This wasn't just a showpiece, she realized. This was his home. Omar poured her a glass of sparkling water with fresh mint and led her to the kitchen, which was surprisingly traditional despite the modern appliances. He had already begun preparing what he called his mother's famous chicken makbuz, and the aroma of cardamom, cinnamon, and dried limes filled the air. As he worked, explaining each step with the patience of a natural teacher, Elena found herself relaxing into the domesticity of the moment. She chopped vegetables while he told her stories about growing up in Kuwait, about summers spent at his family's beach house, about his father teaching him to dive in the warm Gulf waters. She shared her own stories in return, about her childhood in Barcelona, her decision to pursue international business, the loneliness of constant travel for work. There was an ease to their conversation that surprised her, as if they had known each other for years rather than days. When the food was ready, they ate at a table positioned before the windows, the city sprawling beneath them in a tapestry of lights. The makbuz was delicious, complex and aromatic, and Elena said so repeatedly until Omar laughed and told her to stop, or he would develop an insufferable ego. After dinner, he gave her a tour of the penthouse, pointing out pieces of art he had collected, explaining the significance of various decorative elements. When they reached the hallway leading to what Elena assumed were the bedrooms, Omar paused, his expression suddenly serious. "There is something I need to show you," he said quietly. His tone made Elena's stomach tighten with an unidentifiable emotion, something between curiosity and concern. "Something I have not shown to anyone outside my family," he continued, and now his eyes searched her face as if looking for something. "Elena, I feel a connection with you that I cannot explain, and I believe in honesty above all else. Will you trust me?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with significance. Elena didn't fully understand. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw only sincerity and something that looked like hope. She nodded, and Omar took her hand, his grip warm and steady, and led her deeper into the penthouse. They walked down a corridor Eleanor hadn't noticed during the tour, its walls lined with more family photographs. Omar stopped before a door that looked heavier than the others, made of dark wood, with an electronic keypad beside the handle. He punched in a code, and Elena heard the heavy click of multiple locks disengaging. The door swung open to reveal not the horror she had suddenly, inexplicably feared, but what appeared to be a small museum. The room was climate-controlled. She could feel the cool air immediately, and it was filled with glass display cases arranged in neat rows. Omar led her inside, watching her face carefully. "These are artifacts," he said softly. "Ancient artifacts from Mesopotamia, from Dilmun, from the various civilizations that have called this region home over thousands of years." Elena stepped closer to the nearest case and saw pottery shards, coins, small sculptures, all carefully labeled with dates and locations. Some of the items bore tags indicating they were on loan from the Kuwait National Museum, but others had no such designation. "I started collecting when I was young," Omar explained, moving to stand beside her. "My grandfather sparked my interest in our region's history. But then I became obsessed, perhaps too obsessed. I began to acquire pieces through less than official channels, pieces that were being sold illegally, smuggled out of archaeological sites." Elena felt her throat tighten. Omar's voice was steady, but tinged with what sounded like shame. "I told myself I was preserving history, that at least I was keeping them safe rather than letting them disappear into private collections where they would never be seen again. But I knew deep down that I was contributing to the destruction of our cultural heritage." Every piece I bought created demand for more looting, more destruction of irreplaceable archaeological context. He gestured around the room at the hundreds of items displayed there. I've been working with the Ministry of Antiquities for the past 2 years, documenting everything, determining provenance where possible, preparing to return it all. It has been the most difficult thing I have ever done, admitting what I had done, facing the consequences. There will be fines, possibly other penalties. My reputation in certain circles will be destroyed. But it is the right thing to do. Elena stood frozen, her mind racing to process what she was seeing and hearing. This was the horrifying truth the luxury penthouse concealed. Not violence or cruelty, but a different kind of theft. The theft of history from the people it belonged to. She thought of the museums she had visited, the plaques explaining how artifacts had been looted during times of conflict, how they were still trying to track down and repatriate stolen treasures. And here she was, standing in a private collection that represented years of such theft. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Omar turned to face her fully, and she could see the tension in his shoulders, the fear in his eyes. "Because I am falling for you," he said simply. "Because if this is going to be something real between us, you need to know who I am, what I have done. Because I do not want to build something on lies or omissions. Because you deserve the truth." Elena moved along the cases, looking at each item with new eyes. A small clay tablet with cuneiform writing, a bronze figurine of a bull, a necklace of carnelian beads that might have adorned someone's neck 3,000 years ago. Each piece represented not just an object, but a story ripped from its context, a piece of human history commodified and hidden away. "How many pieces are here?" she asked. 217, Omar replied immediately. "I've catalogued everything, determined as much as I can about where each piece came from, though in many cases that information is incomplete. The ones from Kuwait will go back to the National Museum. The others, I am working with UNESCO and the relevant national museums to ensure proper repatriation." Elena looked at him, this man who had seemed so perfect just hours before, and saw instead someone complicated, flawed, but trying to make amends. She thought about walking away, about ending this before it truly began. But she also thought about the courage it must have taken to show her this, to risk her judgment and rejection. "Have you stopped?" she asked. "Acquiring pieces?" "Yes," Omar said firmly. 2 years ago, completely. The last item I obtained is that painted pottery fragment in the case by the window. I realized I had become something I despised, and I stopped. Sena took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts. She walked back to where Omar stood, noting how he watched her with an expression of barely concealed anxiety. "I appreciate your honesty," she said carefully. "And I understand that what you are doing now, trying to make it right, matters. But I need time to process this. What you did, even if you have stopped, contributed to the destruction of irreplaceable historical sites. People dedicate their lives to studying these civilizations, and every artifact removed from its context means lost information that can never be recovered." Omar nodded, his expression pained. "I know," he said, "and I will not ask you to forgive what I have done or to minimize it. If you choose to walk away right now, I will understand completely and respect your decision. But I hope," he paused, searching for words, "I hope you will give me the chance to show you that I am more than the worst thing I have ever done." Elena studied his face, saw the genuine remorse there, the fear of losing something that had barely begun. She thought about her own mistakes, the times she had made choices that had hurt others, the grace she had been granted when she sought to make amends. She thought about the fact that he was actively working to correct his mistakes, not just hiding them away. "I will not share this information," she said finally. "That is your story to tell, your amends to make. But I also cannot simply ignore it. Omar, this is serious. If we are going to continue seeing each other, I need to see proof that you are truly committed to making this right. I need to see the documentation you mentioned, evidence that you are working with the proper authorities." And I need you to understand that my values around cultural heritage are not negotiable. Omar's face flooded with relief and something like gratitude. Of course, he said quickly. Anything you need. I can show you the correspondence with the ministry, the inventory records, the agreements we have made. I'm not asking you to compromise your values, Elena. I'm asking for the chance to align my actions with my own values. Values I lost sight of for too long. Elena felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. All right, she said. Show me. They spent the next hour in Omar's study, a smaller room off the main living area where his laptop and filing cabinets held the evidence of his repatriation efforts. Elena read through emails from museum directors, legal documents outlining the process for returning the artifacts, inventories with detailed provenance research where available. It was clear that Omar had not been exaggerating about his efforts or the potential consequences he faced. There would indeed be substantial fines, and his name would be associated with the illegal antiquities trade even as he worked to undo his participation in it. As Elena scrolled through a particularly detailed exchange with an archaeologist from the Iraq Museum about several cylinder seals in Omar's collection, she felt her perspective shifting. This was not a man making excuses or seeking to minimize his actions. This was someone genuinely trying to make restitution, to prioritize cultural heritage over his own comfort or reputation. When she finally closed the laptop and turned to face him, she saw exhaustion in his features, the toll this process was taking on him. Thank you for showing me all this, she said. I can see that you are serious about making this right. Omar leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. There are days when I want to give up, he admitted, when the bureaucracy feels overwhelming, or when I face the judgment of people in the academic and museum communities who, rightfully, view me with suspicion or disdain. But then I think about those artifacts, about the stories they could tell if they were properly studied, if they were accessible to scholars and the public rather than locked away in my apartment. And I remember why I am doing this. Elena found herself reaching across the desk to take his hand. You are doing the right thing, she said. It will not erase what you did, but it matters. It matters that you stopped, that you recognized the harm, that you are taking concrete steps to address it. And for what it is worth, I think it shows tremendous character to choose the difficult path of honesty and restitution over simply continuing to hide what you had done. Omar squeezed her hand, his eyes bright with emotion. Does this mean you will give us a chance? He asked. Elena smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Yes, she said, but I have conditions. Omar laughed, a sound of pure relief. Name them, he said. I want to be involved in the repatriation process, Elena said. Not in any official capacity, but I want to understand it. To see these pieces returned to where they belong. I want to meet the people you are working with, to see this through, and I want complete honesty moving forward. About everything. No more secrets, no matter how uncomfortable the truth might be. Done, Omar said immediately. All of it gladly. They returned to the living room, and Omar made mint tea while Elena stood at the windows, looking out at the glittering city. She thought about the strange turn her life had taken in just 2 days. How she had arrived in Kuwait, expecting routine meetings and site visits, and instead had found herself entangled with a man whose past was complicated, but whose present actions spoke to the person he was trying to become. When Omar joined her with 2 glasses of steaming tea, they sat on the low sofa near the windows and talked for hours more. He told her about his parents' reaction when he had confessed what he had been doing, his father's anger and his mother's tears. He described the painstaking process of researching each artifact, the frustration of incomplete records and cold trails. He spoke about his hopes for the future, about wanting to support legitimate archaeological work in the region, about perhaps establishing a foundation to fund conservation efforts. Elena shared her own dreams and ambitions. Her desire to eventually start her own consulting firm focused on ethical business practices. Her love of travel and discovery, her complicated relationship with her own family back in Spain. As the night deepened and the city lights below began to dim, Elena realized she had not thought about her hotel room or her early morning meeting in hours. When she finally checked her phone, she was shocked to see it was past 2 in the morning. "I should go," she said reluctantly. Omar nodded, but she could see the disappointment in his eyes. "Let me drive you," he said, but Elena shook her head. "Call me a car," she said. "You have given me so much to think about tonight. I need a little time alone to process everything." Omar understood. She could see it in his face, and he pulled out his phone to arrange her transportation. While they waited for the driver, they stood together at the windows, and Elena found herself leaning into Omar's warmth as his arm came around her shoulders. "Thank you," he said softly, "for not running. For giving me a chance to show you who I am trying to be." Elena looked up at him, at the strong lines of his face softened by the dim lighting, and felt something settle into place inside her. "Thank you for trusting me with the truth," she replied. "For taking the risk. Do you ever regret it?" Omar asked suddenly, his arm around Elena's waist. "Meeting me, learning my secret, taking on all the complications that came with loving me?" Elena turned to face him, cupping his face in her hands. "Never," she said fiercely, "not once. Yes, it has been complicated and challenging and sometimes difficult. But Omar, you showed me what real courage looks like, what it means to truly change and grow. You trusted me with your worst secret and then let me watch as you transformed it into something meaningful. How could I regret that?" Omar kissed her softly, and Elena felt the familiar warmth that his touch always brought. "There is something else I want to ask you," he said when they finally pulled apart. "Something I have been thinking about for a while now." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, and Elena's breath caught in her throat. "I know we have built an unconventional life together," he said, opening the box to reveal a stunning ring, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. "I know we have already made commitments to each other, already built a home and a future together. But Elena Martinez, I want to make it official. I want to marry you, to stand before our families and our communities and declare that you are my partner in all things. Will you marry me?" Elena felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling so widely her cheeks hurt. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, absolutely yes." As Omar slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, Elena thought about how far they had both come. She thought about that first evening when she had seen him across the crowded room and felt that inexplicable pull. She thought about her terror when he showed her the artifacts, her struggle to reconcile the man she was falling for with the actions he had taken. She thought about their decision to move forward together, to build something real despite the complications and challenges. And she thought about everything that had come after, the work and the love and the growth they had both experienced. This is what real love looks like, she realized. Not just the initial attraction or the romantic gestures, though those mattered too, but the willingness to see each other fully, flaws and mistakes and all, and choose to move forward together anyway. The commitment to support each other's growth, to hold each other accountable while offering grace and understanding as they planned their wedding. A small ceremony in Barcelona, followed by a larger reception in Kuwait to honor both their families and traditions. Elena reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. She thought about the title that could have been written about their story, something dramatic, like she had once fallen for a businessman in Kuwait. But his luxury penthouse revealed a horrifying truth. And while that was technically accurate, it also missed the point entirely. Yes, Omar's penthouse had concealed a secret, but that secret had become the catalyst for profound change, for a journey of redemption and growth that had transformed both their lives. The real story was not about the horror of discovery, but about what came after. About two people choosing to face difficult truths together and build something meaningful from the rubble of past mistakes. Their wedding day dawned clear and bright, the spring sun gentle on the streets of Barcelona's Gothic quarter. Elena wore her grandmother's lace veil and carried wildflowers from the markets, while Omar wore a traditional Kuwaiti dishdasha, honoring both their cultures. Carlos walked Elena down the aisle, and she saw tears in his eyes as he placed her hand in Omar's. Her mother sobbed openly in the front row, while Omar's parents beamed with pride and joy. The ceremony itself was a beautiful blend of Spanish and Kuwaiti traditions, with readings in both Arabic and Spanish, music that spanned cultures and continents. When it came time for the vows, they had chosen to write their own, and Elena's voice shook only slightly as she promised to love Omar through complications and challenges, to support his continued growth and hold him accountable to his values, to build a life together that honored both their individual dreams and their shared commitments. Omar's vows spoke of gratitude and devotion, of the transformative power of love, of his commitment to be worthy of the trust Elena had placed in him. When the officiant finally pronounced them married and they kissed to thunderous applause, Elena felt a completeness she had never experienced before. This was home, she realized. Not a place or a city, but this person, this relationship they had built through honesty and effort and love. The reception was held in a renovated warehouse space overlooking the Mediterranean, strings of lights creating a canopy of stars overhead as they danced late into the night. Dr. Al-Mutairi had traveled from Kuwait for the celebration, and she pulled Elena aside at one point to tell her how much Omar's work had meant to the museum community. "He is setting an example," she said, "showing others that it is never too late to do the right thing, that redemption is possible through concrete action and genuine remorse. You should both be proud of what you have built together." As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Elena and Omar found themselves alone on the terrace, the sound of waves audible even over the fading music. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the lights of the city reflected on the water, holding hands like they had that first night in Omar's penthouse, when everything was new and uncertain. "We did it," Omar said softly. "We built something real." Elena leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "We did," she agreed, "and we will keep building it every day together." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms and the promise of their future, Elena thought about how glad she was that she had trusted her instincts that first evening, that she had taken the risk of falling for a businessman in Kuwait despite not knowing where it would lead. Yes, his luxury penthouse had revealed a horrifying truth, but it had also revealed something far more important: the capacity for change, for growth, for two people to find each other and choose, again and again, to do the difficult work of building a life together. And in the end, Elena thought as Omar kissed her temple and whispered something in Arabic that she was still learning to understand. That choice, that daily recommitment to each other and to their shared values, was the real story worth telling. Not the horror of past mistakes, but the beauty of present action, the hope of future possibility, and the transformative power of love to help people become their best selves. The meeting, when it finally happened, was both better and worse than Elena had anticipated. Her mother fell for Omar immediately, charmed by his good manners, and the way he insisted on speaking Spanish despite his limited vocabulary. Her younger sister peppered him with questions about Kuwait and his business, her eyes wide with fascination. But her brother, Carlos, was more reserved, watching Omar with barely concealed suspicion throughout the dinner. After the meal, as their mother insisted on showing Omar embarrassing photo albums, Carlos pulled Elena aside in the kitchen. "What do you really know about this guy?" he asked bluntly. "He seems almost too perfect, Elena. Rich, handsome, cultured, completely devoted to you after just a few months. Does not that strike you as odd?" Elena felt defensive anger rise in her chest. "You do not know him, Carlos," she said. "You do not know what he has shared with me, what we have been through together. He is not perfect, believe me, but he is real, and what we have is real." Carlos sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm just worried about you, Elena. You have always been so independent, so focused on your career. I do not want to see you hurt or taken advantage of. I'm not being taken advantage of, Elena said firmly. I'm an adult making my own choices. And yes, Omar comes with complications, we both do. But I love him, Carlos, and he loves me. Can you not just be happy for me? Carlos studied her face for a long moment, then finally nodded. All right, he said. All right, if he makes you happy, then I will try to be supportive. But I am watching him, Elena. One wrong move and he will answer to me. Elena laughed despite herself and hugged her brother. Fair enough, she said. Later that night, as she and Omar walked through the quiet streets of her childhood neighborhood, she apologized for Carlos's intensity. Omar just shrugged and took her hand. He loves you and wants to protect you, he said. I respect that. Besides, if our positions were reversed, if you were meeting my family and I had a sibling watching out for my interests, I would appreciate their caution. It means you have people who care about you, Elena. That is a gift, even when it feels like interference. As their first year together approached, Elena and Omar began to seriously discuss their future. The repatriation process was moving forward steadily, with more than half the artifacts now returned or in the process of being returned. Omar had paid substantial fines and accepted a formal censure from several archaeological organizations. But he had also begun to rebuild his reputation through his support of legitimate excavation and conservation projects. He had established the foundation he had dreamed of, dedicated to funding archaeological research in the Middle East with strict ethical guidelines. Elena, meanwhile, had finally taken the leap and started her own consulting firm, focused specifically on helping companies develop ethical supply chains and cultural sensitivity in international markets. It was challenging and occasionally terrifying, but also deeply fulfilling in ways her corporate job had never been. One evening, as they sat in Omar's penthouse, now noticeably emptier with so many of the artifacts gone, Omar brought up the question they had been dancing around for months. Where do you want to be, Elena, he asked. Not just physically, but in your life. If you could design your perfect future, what would it look like? Elena thought carefully before answering. I want to keep building my business, she said. I want to keep traveling and learning and challenging myself professionally. But I also want a home, a base, somewhere that feels like mine, like ours. I want to stop living out of hotel rooms and suitcases quite so much. And I want us, to be more than stolen weekends and complicated logistics. Omar nodded slowly. I have been thinking the same thing, he said. And I have a proposal. Though you should know I'm terrified, you will say no. He took a deep breath, and Elena felt her heart start to race. Move in with me, he said. Here in Kuwait, or we could look for a place together somewhere else, if you prefer. I know it is a big step. I know it will require compromises from both of us. But Elena, I am tired of being apart more than we are together. I want to wake up next to you, not just when our schedules align, but every day. I want to build a life with you, not just a relationship that exists in the margins of our busy lives. Elena felt tears well up in her eyes, but they were tears of joy and relief. Yes, she said immediately. Yes, but not here in Kuwait full-time. I love this city, but it does not feel like home to me, not the way Barcelona does. What if we split our time? Kept the penthouse here, but also got a place in Barcelona. We could spend part of the year in each location, and it would give us both the flexibility to pursue our work while having real homes together in both places. Omar's face broke into the widest smile Elena had ever seen. That is perfect, he said. That is absolutely perfect. They kissed then, a kiss full of promise and relief and hope, and Elena felt the last piece of uncertainty that had been lodged in her chest for months finally dissolve. This was real. They were real, and they were going to build a life together. The logistics of their new arrangement took several months to work out. They found a beautiful apartment in Barcelona's Gothic quarter, full of character and light, with enough space for both of them to work from home when needed. Omar kept his penthouse in Kuwait, but they hired a property manager to handle the day-to-day maintenance when they were not in residence. They established a rhythm of 3 months in Barcelona, 2 months in Kuwait, with frequent shorter trips mixed in for work and pleasure. It was unconventional, but it worked for them, giving them both the stability of home and the adventure of travel. Elena's family slowly warmed to Omar, won over by his obvious devotion to her and his genuine interest in their lives. Even Carlos eventually came around, particularly after Omar sought his advice on a business matter related to Carlos's expertise in logistics. Omar's parents, when Elena finally met them on a visit to their family compound outside Kuwait City, welcomed her with warmth that surprised her. His mother, Amira, pulled her aside after dinner and said, "You have brought my son back to himself. After what happened, after his mistakes with those artifacts, I feared he had lost his way permanently. But you have helped him find his purpose again, helped him become the man I always believed he could be." 2 years after that fateful networking event, Elena and Omar returned to the Kuwait City Hilton for the annual business conference. This time, as an established couple, their relationship no longer a secret or a risk. They laughed about how nervous they had both been that first evening, how neither of them could have imagined where that initial conversation would lead. Omar had been invited to speak on a panel about ethical business practices and cultural responsibility, sharing his story publicly for the first time. Elena sat in the audience watching as he took the stage and felt a swell of pride in her chest. He was vulnerable and honest, not shying away from the gravity of his past actions, but also not wallowing in shame. He spoke about the importance of accountability, about how true change required not just stopping harmful behavior, but actively working to repair the damage done. He described the repatriation process, the artifacts that had been returned, the relationships he had built with museum professionals and archaeologists. And he talked about the foundation he had created, about funding legitimate excavation and conservation work, about ensuring that future generations would have access to their cultural heritage. When he finished, the applause was thunderous, and Elena saw tears on the faces of several audience members. Afterward, during the networking reception, people approached Omar to thank him for his honesty, to ask questions about the repatriation process, to express interest in supporting his foundation's work. Dr. Al-Mutayiri was there, and she hugged Omar warmly, telling him that the artifacts he had returned were now on display in a new exhibition about Kuwait's ancient trade routes. "You should be proud," she told him. "What you did was wrong, but what you are doing now matters. You are making a real difference." That night, back at the Penthouse, Elena and Omar stood at the windows overlooking the city where they had first fallen in love. The room that had once held Omar's secret collection now housed his home office, shelves filled with books about archaeology and cultural heritage, walls decorated with photographs from excavation sites his foundation supported. The transformation was complete, not just of the space, but of the man himself. The following weeks unfolded like a dream Elena occasionally feared she would wake from. She extended her stay in Kuwait, citing additional research opportunities to her firm, and spent every available moment with Omar. He was true to his word about involving her in the repatriation process, and Elena found herself attending meetings with museum curators and archaeologists, learning about the complex legal and ethical frameworks governing cultural heritage. She met Dr. Layla Al-Mutayiri, the head curator at the Kuwait National Museum, who was overseeing the return of the Kuwaiti artifacts from Omar's collection. Dr. Al-Mutayiri was a formidable woman in her 50s, sharp-eyed and direct, and Elena had worried she would view Elena with suspicion as Omar's girlfriend. Instead, after their first meeting, Dr. Al-Mutayiri pulled Elena aside and said quietly, "He is doing something remarkable, you know. Many collectors never admit what they have done, never take responsibility. The fact that he came forward voluntarily, that he is accepting the consequences, that speaks to genuine remorse. Make sure he knows that his efforts matter, that they are appreciated, even as we hold him accountable for his past actions." Elena had relayed this conversation to Omar that evening, and she had watched his face transform with relief and something like redemption. They fell into a routine, meeting for early morning coffee before Elena's work calls. Long dinners at Omar's penthouse where they cooked together and talked about everything and nothing. Weekends spent exploring Kuwait's cultural sites and natural beauty. Omar took her to the Grand Mosque, its architecture a stunning blend of Islamic design traditions, and to the Kuwait Towers, those iconic landmarks that had welcomed her when she first arrived. They visited Failaka Island, where ancient ruins spoke to the region's rich history. And Elena felt a bittersweet pang, thinking about how Omar's hidden collection had robbed similar sites of their treasures. But she also saw how he had changed, how he engaged with these places, not as a collector looking for his next acquisition, but as someone genuinely interested in preserving and sharing cultural heritage. One Saturday they drove out to the desert, and as the sun set over the endless dunes, painting the sand in shades of gold and amber, Omar turned to her and said, "I love you, Elena. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I am certain. You have changed my life in ways I cannot fully express." Elena felt tears prick her eyes, not from surprise, but from the overwhelming rightness of the moment. "I love you too," she said, and when he kissed her, she tasted salt and mint and possibility. But as spring turned to summer, reality began to intrude on their bubble of happiness. Elena's extended stay in Kuwait could not last forever, and her firm was growing insistent that she return to her regular rotation of assignments. The repatriation process, while progressing, would take months more, possibly years for some of the pieces with more complicated provenance questions. The question of what would come next hung between them, unspoken but ever-present. It was Omar who finally broached the subject one evening as they sat on his balcony, the warm night air carrying the scent of jasmine from the plants Elena had insisted he add. "What are we going to do?" he asked simply, and Elena appreciated his directness, even as her heart sank. "I do not know," she admitted. "I cannot stay in Kuwait indefinitely, and my work requires me to travel constantly. But I cannot imagine going back to my old life, to not seeing you, not being part of this journey you are on." Omar was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the Gulf waters that glimmered in the moonlight. "I have a proposal," he said finally. "I need to travel anyway, to visit the museums where we are returning artifacts, to meet with officials and experts. What if I adjusted my schedule to align with yours when possible? What if we carved out time, made seeing each other a priority, even if it means complicated logistics and frequent flights? It is not ideal, I know, but perhaps it could work, at least until the repatriation is complete and we can re-evaluate." Elena felt hope bloom in her chest. "We would be together sometimes, but not all the time," she said slowly, thinking it through. "We would have to build our relationship in stolen moments and video calls and carefully coordinated schedules. It will be hard," Omar agreed. "But Elena, I think what we have is worth the difficulty, unless you disagree." Elena shook her head emphatically. "No," she said. "No, I think it is absolutely worth it." So they made their plan, coordinating calendars and time zones, booking flights and hotel rooms in cities where their paths would cross. Elena returned to Barcelona to handle the logistics of her new arrangement with her firm, negotiating more flexible terms and accepting a slight reduction in salary for the privilege of controlling more of her schedule. Omar continued his work with the museums, and Elena watched via video chat as the first major transfer took place. 17 pieces from the Kuwait National Museum's own collection returning home, after years hidden in Omar's penthouse. She saw the emotion on his face as he handed over the artifacts, the weight of responsibility lifting even as new complications emerged around pieces with more ambiguous origins. Their long-distance relationship was everything Elena had feared and hoped for. There were frustrating video calls plagued by poor connections and time zone confusion, mornings when she woke missing him with an ache that felt physical. But there were also unexpected meetings in Dubai and London and Cairo, weekends stolen from busy schedules, the profound joy of reunion after separation. They learned each other's travel habits and preferences, the small intimacies that come from navigating airports and hotels together. Elena discovered that Omar was a nervous flyer who gripped the armrest during turbulence and preferred aisle seats. Omar learned that Elena could not function before her first coffee and became obsessed with finding the best local roasters in every city they visited. 6 months into their long-distance arrangement, Elena was in Rome for a consulting project when Omar called with news that made her heart race. "I've been invited to speak at a conference in Madrid," he said, "and I wondered if you might want to come home for it. I know you said your family relationships are complicated, but I would like to meet them if you are ready for that." Elena felt a knot form in her stomach. Her family was indeed complicated. Her mother still bitter about Elena's father's abandonment when she was young. Her older brother constantly critical of her career choices. Her younger sister, sweet but scattered. She had not told them much about Omar, only vague mentions of someone she was seeing, and the thought of bringing him into that fraught dynamic filled her with anxiety. But she also knew that avoiding it forever was not a real option, not if they were serious about building a life together. "All right," she said. "Yes, let us do it. I will arrange it." The week leading up to the Madrid trip, Elena was a bundle of nerves. She briefed Omar extensively on her family dynamics, warned him about her brother's likely skepticism and her mother's tendency to overshare embarrassing childhood stories. Omar listened patiently and assured her that he had weathered difficult family meetings before, that his own extended family was full of strong personalities and complicated histories. "We will face them together," he said, and Elena tried to let his confidence steady her.